All right, everybody. Welcome back to this Thought Arcade. Today we're going to have a brief special episode because we have some people out today. We want to remain consistent in what we're doing, and so we're using this as a really good opportunity to sort of branch off into our own individual segments that we're going to do. We got some good stuff in the works with Chris and with what Daniel's working on. So today I thought I'd bring back the History Corner. So I thought we'd bring back the History Corner, and today I'm actually going to be reviewing two books with y'all today. The first one is going to be Lords of the Sea by John R. Hale. Really great book. And then the second book is going to be To Rule the Waves by Arthur Herman. And so, what I want to do with this series is, talk about history, something that I'm very passionate about, obviously, with what I like um, as a hobby. And it, to me, this is going to help me sort of get refocused on history and discussing it and reaching out to people about it. So my thing is that I want to be able to read more. I want to be able to study more, especially since now that I'm working at a maritime museum, basically. And so I really didn't have a true passion for maritime history for a really long time. It kind of just maybe started sputtering around about 2 years ago, and so I really don't know that much about maritime history. I've got a bunch of stuff that I'm reading through right now about it, and I think that maritime history and maritime power itself, sea power itself, I wouldn't say it goes underrated, but it definitely gets sidetracked compared to stuff like in World War I or World War II, where it's sort of sidelined as not the main attraction. Everyone, wants to talk about the armies. Like in World War I, everyone wants to talk about the trench warfare in the Western Front, despite the fact that there's so many other moving parts within World War I. And one of those is a great cataclysm that triggers off of the great naval race between England and Germany. And that is one of these like seminal striking moments that leads to World War I. So I think that me going into working in a maritime museum and getting a better understanding of these, and then talking with y'all with these two books are really great introductions into maritime history, but not only that, but maritime history as it reflects on society, which is another big sort of key component. Growing up in a port town, maritime trade is what's important. It's what's going to dominate that whole town basically. In Corpus Christi, Texas, it was a really big thing to get the U.S. to finally open up trade with Cuba because all that trade's going to go through Corpus Christi. Uh, it wasn't necessarily going to go through New Orleans or bigger Gulf Coast ports. It was going to go through Corpus Christi, and that of course means more income for the city. So, but outside of that sort of brief review, and then with this series, I'll maybe try to do something like once a month or something like that. Put together a small little project, and so this episode's sort of like a pilot episode, a test run. See what y'all think. Give comments, feedback. See what y'all want from us and our little mini series, and see what y'all would like to do. But we just figured this would be a great way to show off our personalities or like our interests and stuff like that, and branch out a little bit more. It's unofficially sponsored by Monster watermelon flavor. Great flavor. All right. So, first book is going to be Lords of the Sea by John R. Hale, and it's the epic story of the Athenian Navy and the rise of democracy. And John R. Hale is a really good writer. Typically with history books, you get bogged down into like these almost textbook formats, and it makes it dull, boring, a grind to get through. With John R. Hale's writing style, it does not do that. You feel very invested from the very beginning of the book all the way to the end about the Athenian city as pertains to its vassalocracy, which is a sea power, dominant sea power. The book time frame spans from the foundation of the city of Athens all the way up until it's conquered by the Macedonians and Philip II. Um, so it's a pretty wide time span, but he covers each individual part. It treats each individual part with respect. He doesn't sort of seem to overlap with anything, or what's typically found in history books is they spend the first third of it, talk about the background, and then like, a quarter of it into like the actual thesis of the book and what they're trying to convey, and then trying to play catch up with the last 2 or 3 chapters. Here, it doesn't feel like that. He treats each sort of like age or time frame, if you will, with respect and sort of like reinvest you into the time period that you're trying to read about. So he breaks down the rise of the Athenian navy under Pericles and states, it was him and was under his guidance that without the Athenian navy, the Persians would have absolutely conquered the Greek world, which it really would have. But due to the Battle of Salamis and some other key battles, like there was actually a naval battle off of Thermopylae, it really put the Persians in a bind because now they can't reinforce themselves. So if you're on an expedition, and let alone you're on an expedition across the continent, if you can't resupply within a matter of months, it's just ancient times, the sea is going to be a lot more faster than going through land, which can be open to raiding. It can be open to, bad weather, stuff like that. Whereas by sea, you can reinforce pretty quickly, relatively quickly, and also bring in, extra reinforcements, supplies. You're going to carry a lot more than you would if you were in a caravan. So Pericles sees this and has this vision that he's going to build this sort of wooden wall, if you will, and that wooden wall is going to be the Athenian navy. He goes into how the ships are built, how the rams are produced, and how these vessels were manned. He talks about the Athenian Marines, the sort of actual combatants. There'd only be about 10 to 15 per ship, and each one would carry 300 men, and 250 of those people could be rowers. So he breaks all that down, breaks down the actual conflict of the Greeks and Persians from a naval perspective, which is something that we don't hear enough of in today's study. We always talk about the Spartans, the Last Stand, Battle of Plataea, that sort of thing, when in reality, he puts it into perspective of at the Battle of Salamis, which was a naval battle in which the Athenians sort of surprise the Persian navy and take over. He breaks down, well, because of this, the Persians are left pretty vulnerable. They're far from their homeland, and they can't reinforce themselves, and they can't supply themselves. And winter's coming on, and winter back then meant you can't campaign because you can't feed yourself. So breaks down that really good way. And then he gets into the actual Athenian society and Thessalocracy of Athens, the city itself. I find that really fascinating because I never sort of pictured the legend of Athens along as a sort of what's the word? I'm not quite sure. So he breaks down the legend of Atlantis that Plato writes, and it's apparently we're being viewing it as wrong, where Atlantis is like a warning. So Atlantis in Plato's writing is this big dominant sea power that goes off and controls everybody, and that is a reflection of Athens coming out of the Persian War, where they create this thing called the Delian League, or something called the Athenian League, in which every member pays tribute to Athens, and then Athens sends out a navy and uses its naval prowess as a force projection and a force multiplier. So he takes that and looks and he writes this legend about Atlantis, and he uses it, and he flips the script. He puts Atlantis as this um, literary analysis for Athens, which I've never thought of or tried to view that, which is something that happens, and that's you never think about that. And of course, Atlantis has this big cataclysmic event, and it sinks under the water. And Plato's writing this as a warning, saying, "Hey, if we continue down this path where we're completely invested in our navy, we're completely invested in the Thessalocracy sort of society, like part of society, like we're going to be doomed to failure." So he's writing Atlantis as a warning, and the people that stand up to Atlantis are typically viewed as like as they're like the people that they're agrarian, they want to be left alone, that sort of thing. But it's really like that's really what he wants Athens to be. It's kind of reminded me of Thomas Jefferson and how he wanted to set up the great agrarian society within the United States early on, right after the Revolutionary War, and whenever he becomes president, he's trying to set this up. Plato kind of wants that sort of same thing. Uh, so I think that's really fascinating because I've never pictured Atlantis like this, but John puts tremendous effort and tremendous writing and scholarship into that, and I think that it's absolutely amazing. Um, he then goes in and breaks down the Peloponnesian War, which is the Athens and the Delian League versus Sparta and the Peloponnesian League. Um, and this is really just as a power play from Sparta and Athens, trying to see who could become the hegemon or the leader of the Greek world. And of course, this ends up going badly for Athens, and they end up losing. But because of their naval strategy of pretty much avoiding land conflict, but becoming dominant on the sea and becoming really defensive, it makes them stay in the war and prolong what really would have been pretty doomed from the start. Traditionally you wouldn't want to go up against a Spartan army because they're typically the best of the best. They had that reputation for a reason. But the Spartans don't have a navy, and the Athenians use this navy to land troops, do hit and run tactics, raid certain parts of the Peloponnese, and so the Spartans are constantly moving to each new threat, and it keeps them moving so they can't be on the offensive, which is a really brilliant strategy. It's kind of like a guerrilla warfare, but it's from the sea. And as long as Athens has this navy, they have a power to do that. Then he starts writing about the hubris that I think comes from the Athenian navy, and then Athens as a society at the peak and pinnacle of its power, uh, where they go on an expedition all the way to Syracuse, and they basically just get decimated. It's a terrible campaign. There were a couple opponents that said, "Hey, we should not be doing this. Like if we go to Syracuse, like we're gonna die and we're gonna lose this war." But the hubris the of pretty much every Athenian was like, "No, we have this naval power. We're gonna set it up and we're gonna use it." And so they go to Syracuse. They get bogged down in this really lengthy siege, which they can't be, because now the Spartans say, "Hey, Syracuse, you're being attacked. We'll help you." And so they go off and they help them, and they attack, the Attica, which is the Athenian homeland, start raiding it, and now Athens is in a pretty perilous position. Their navy's being sent over to support the Syracuse expedition as well as its army. So you have all of your resources, hundreds of miles away. You can't reinforce off of that position, and you can't. There's no strategic capital once they capture Syracuse, if they even capture it, which of course they don't. It ends up being a complete failure, and it sort of sets the demise of Athens as a leader inside the Greek world. So Spartan ends up winning the Peloponnesian War. They institute an oligarchy, which is a leader of a few people. Uh, And during all of this time, when John R. Hale is breaking down the Athenian Navy and its actions, he's breaking down the society and talking about how within the naval structure is finding a voice for leadership. And that sort of sparks and grows and bleeds over into Athenian society. So that democracy itself was sort of born out of this maritime experiment of vassallocracy and naval power. So he really conveyed. I wish he kind of conveyed it a little bit more. He's kind of. It doesn't feel like he nitpicks, but he kind of expands on sort of like the same couple of examples. Um, but it's a really interesting thesis to say, because of this, because the way Athens was and set up as a maritime power, that alongside of it was democracy, and even if it was in a sort of limited capacity, it's probably the most true form of democracy that we've ever seen, and we probably ever will see. It wasn't like a representative state that we have it now today. Pretty much everybody that was there had a voice, and everyone had to have a say. So he conveys that sort of parallel rise of the Athenian Navy within democracy, and then the Athenian Navy or the Athenian society overall, and it's really good. I really enjoyed it. If you don't know much about Athens or ancient Greece or something like that, I would absolutely recommend it. Um, to conclude the book, he talks about the Macedonian expedition, in which Macedon with Philip II and eventually his son Alexander the Great go and conquer Greece, uh, and how really the last bastion of this defense was the Navy, and how it left such an impression on Alexander the Great that he, in turn, started building up a navy. He wanted the Macedonians to rival Athens and to be the next, like the predecessor, or successor of the Athenians in terms of maritime power, because the brilliant strategic mind of Alexander the Great said, "Hey, we have to have a navy because we're going off into Anatolia, Turkey, into Syria, and then further east. We're gonna have to be supplied from the navy. We can't take these month long treks with caravans that are going to be exposed. It's got to be from a navy." And he sees that, and he uses the Athenian model as a way to set up his own navy and military power. And so that's kind of how he concludes the book. And I think it's a really good read. I really enjoyed it. I typically am like a slow reader, but I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. I never thought about seeing Atlantis as this sort of thing with Athens as a metaphor for what they could happen. Like Plato and Aristotle and these famous philosophers, they were all scared of the navy, and they were scared of what the navy was doing in terms of its society and the way it controls it. It's kind of like an early military industrial complex where everything's getting poured into the navy. Nothing left is for society. Uh, so, like I said, John R. Hale, great book. I highly recommend it. All right. So, the second book, To Rule the Waves, is about how the British Navy shaped the modern world. And in terms of institutions that shaped the world, I think the British Navy needs to be looked at seriously as the top contender, outside of maybe Genghis Khan and the Mongolian army, in terms of an institution that shaped and created and molded the world that we see today. There's a really good book called Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. I recommend that if you're interested. Uh, but Arthur Herman tells a pretty lengthy time span of about 500 years where he starts breaking down just where the maritime society within England was set up, and it was set up in Cornwall, which is the little peninsula in the southwest of England. And he talks about, like these were fishermen. They've always had sort of like a natural inclination for being out on the sea, and breaking down that society and how it bleeds over into the rest of England. It's really quite fascinating. Then he talks about how once the monarchy in England is getting established, and this is where it like really picks up. It's into the 1400s, bleeding off into the 1500s, where the New World's being discovered, and England is sitting there as this little vulnerable state that can't really contend with something like France, as it was getting bled dry with the Hundred Years' War. Uh, you have the Scottish up on the north, and you have all these little powers that are like starting to make claims at a world stage, like Portugal. Spain was just becoming united as a single entity from Leon and Castile, and so England's sitting there and they're thinking, "Hey, we got to step up. We have to start contending with the big boys now." And how do I do that? So they they start with setting up inside of their own society things of like the natural law of the sea, and that England itself has claim to the sea, and that it's England that wants that should only have the right to the sea, nobody else. And so they use these sort of thing to help propel itself in starting its navy with under Queen Elizabeth, with people like Francis Drake, stuff like that, Walter Riley, these sort of notable figures, and how it helped shape the Navy to come. Um, and then he goes off and he talks about uh, how much the Navy actually influences the world, and how he talks about its sort of rise as a world power and a status and an influencer in the world through the 1600s, where he talks about the Anglo-Dutch Wars and the capacity to have naval supremacy in the Atlantic, thus being able to colonize the Americas, and going even further, producing the first nautical charts, using compass, stuff like that, to really circumnavigate the world and to start exploring the world is setting off truly in the age of sail and the age of exploration right behind Portugal. And he's using Arthur is using this all as a backdrop, writing up to, hey, all of this stuff leads into the Napoleonic conflict with France and Napoleon several hundred years later, and how the now British Navy is fighting and contending against France and using its naval supremacy to really defeat him. So he breaks all that down. It's truly amazing, like how he writes it. I Again, it's another one of those history books where it's not being bogged down. You're not being just bombarded with just statements and facts and thesis this, thesis that. He's telling a story, and that story is conveyed at a pretty fast pace for what he's trying to achieve. So, going into it, like I didn't know that much about British naval history. I didn't really know that much about British history in general, and this book really, really set a high bar uh, in terms of just all of these sort of implications that the British Navy put into the world. So, like, 3 square meals a day, that sort of expression that comes from the British Navy whenever they're trying to feed their men, and they were one of the first to do this on board a ship, is they would have little square plates and everybody would get some food. And then how they implemented stuff like sauerkraut. He talks about the John Cook expeditions into the Pacific and stuff like that. It's truly it's fascinating. Um, and in terms of, again, institutions that truly changed the world and had those influence on the world, he writes pretty much how the British Navy set everything up. The ending of slavery, that sort of thing, was happening because the British Navy was enforcing that. And talks about how that even preludes into the American Civil War. He touches about um, how in the build up to World War One, England and Germany were in a naval arms race, basically, and how the British thought to stay one step ahead. So throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, talks about the growth of that British Empire was directly through the Navy. We like to think that it was from the British Army conquering, South Africa and pushing up, or into India with the East India Company, stuff like that. None of that could have been facilitated if it not been for their absolute dominance of the sea. So they can have all of these lifelines thousands of miles away in these little seaports throughout the world, and it really sets up again, it sets it up as this is the premier institution that changed the world. Like really nothing can sort of rival it outside of maybe Genghis Khan's Mongolian invasions, or I mean, you can't put it up against anything else. But if you're someone who doesn't know that much about British history, or even if you're somebody that has a lot of scholarship within that subject, absolutely pick up the book. It's great. It's about 600 or so pages, so it's kind of lengthy. And this one, it does kind of feel like the last couple chapters he kind of just briefly writes. Like he even touches on the Falkland Wars in the 1980s against Argentina, and how it sort of kind of revitalized the Navy, but it became the world's greatest institution, and now it's sort of inept, decrepit, neglected, abused, and it's on its downside. So he briefly summarizes that up. I wish he kind of expanded a little bit more about that and the attitude of English society toward the Navy, especially in the present day. I think stuff like that would absolutely be a lot more fascinating. So again, I highly recommend this book. I'm getting I'm getting a more in-depth understanding of sea power and its role that it plays. I think that it's really amazing how, uh, it's terms of not neglect, because there's plenty of stuff on maritime history, but I feel like it doesn't get the respect that it deserves, despite its attention that it's already drawn. I wish that I wish I had a better understanding of it growing up. So I brought in some more books and stuff like that. So be looking out for that in the future. So the best thing about it is, with this series, is explaining these sort of things and trying to get uh, hmm, trying to get a better understanding of the role that a navy and sea power, and even just like a maritime culture like Venice was at one point, the Dutch were at one point, Portuguese were at one point, Spanish were at one point, and these were all world powers, and they were all at the height of their naval power. They're at the height of their empire building. Uh, so it's like starting to become interesting to see. Once you see the demise of their navies, you start seeing the demise of their empires or their society in general. Like especially for the Dutch, they had a really short span where they were, the preeminent world power. English come in 4 wars later, start of 1700s. They become nothing. They just become immersed in trade, and that's it. So it's really great to see. Uh, so well, all right. Well, thank y'all for stopping by. This is gonna be a sort of recurring episode theme within for me. Just something that I can talk about my hobby and stuff like that. I am putting together a Christmas episode. Should be coming out here the next 2 weeks about just like Christmas traditions, where they come from, what they do. I'm probably not gonna make this too long of a series. Probably episodes probably be like 30 minutes or so. So just something to look forward to. Gonna have this stuff in the works. Maybe start talking about stuff like New Year's, which I can't believe is already happening. I'm still processing March 2020. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are. um, but yeah, definitely look forward to this sort of thing. If you have sort of a comment or suggestion of like, hey, talk about this or talk about that, or have something set up that sort of way, absolutely let us know. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe with absolutely everybody. Annoy people with it, kind of like the little kids, those little candy bars. for like their band or whatever, just, do something like that. It's greatly appreciated. All y'all support is going all the way into helping us make better content for y'all. So, alrighty. Well, thank y'all very much for stopping by. This has been the Thought Arcade.